Okay, so in this segment, we'll talk about empiricism, specifically justification empiricism, and perhaps we'll get concept empiricism in there too. So here's the major claim of justification empiricism. All substantive knowledge is a posteriori, where remember, knowledge is a posteriori if the belief in the proposition that's believed is justified at least partly through experience beyond that which is required to understand the proposition in the first place. So you need more experience than what's required to understand the proposition in order to justifiably believe it, in order to know it. So why would anybody accept that all substantive knowledge is a posteriori? Well, there's a few different reasons. You might ask this: how could we know substantive truths without experience? That is, it seems like experience, in particular perceptual experience, is how we encounter the world. Remember, substantive truths are those about the world, not just about our language and concepts. Well, how is it that we could possibly hook on to the world, independent of perception, which provides sort of our causal contact with the world? It seems like if we have substantive a priori knowledge, then we have knowledge of the way the world is without any way of encountering the world, and that seems implausible. There's also a kind of metaphysical case to be made against substantive a priori knowledge, which says this: if you look at necessity and possibility, at morality, at meaning, at mathematics, it's reasonable to ask what makes such claims true. That is, what makes claims about necessity and possibility and so on true. And let's just focus on necessity and possibility here. What makes it true that I'm necessarily human, but only contingently 6 feet 3 inches tall? What are the truth makers for those claims? Where do they come from? You might think, well, look, insofar as the truth makers are out there in the world, we would have no way to detect them, because certainly perception can't pick up on a property of necessity the way that it can pick up on color, sound, and so on and so forth. So it's hard to say what would even make them true, and if you have something in the world making them true, it's hard to say how we would know about them. So it looks like the truth makers must be inside us. There's also an inductive argument which says this: science has had incredible success by sort of looking at the world instead of focusing on a priori reflection about the world. So if you want to have success, if you want to acquire knowledge, that's the way to do it. And finally, there's a standard move to be made here, which is to run through examples of claims that are supposedly a priori and show that our justification for believing them isn't really a priori, or that they're not even true, or something like this. And the reason I write Euclidean geometry here is this is a famous case. Kant famously argued, that is Immanuel Kant, famously argued that Euclidean geometry is knowable a priori, that it constitutes a priori knowledge. But in fact, it turns out Euclidean geometry isn't quite right. So the idea goes that which looks to us like a priori knowledge may well not be knowledge at all. Okay, so those are some reasons to advance justification empiricism. There's different versions of justification empiricism you get depending on how exactly you advance it. So there's a moderate version which says this: we should accept that we have a priori knowledge, but deny that it's substantive. So say it turns out there is a priori knowledge, but it's always just about our language or concepts, or both. Or you can adopt the radical view, which says that there is no a priori knowledge because we don't even know any forum's propositions. We don't even know any truths about modality, morality, meaning, or mathematics. Or you can say this: there is substantive a priori knowledge, and we have it. That is, we have substantive a priori knowledge, but it's had through experience. Despite the concerns raised earlier about acquiring knowledge of the forums through experience, we can do it somehow. People have advanced all of these. This one is probably the least popular. There's a guy, Crawford Elder, who pushes this line. John Stuart Mill pushed this line to some extent, but it's probably the least popular. I can't think of very many other people who have advanced this line. There's lots of people in both of these camps up here. Probably this moderate camp is the most popular version of empiricism. Okay. What's concept empiricism? Well, concept empiricism just says that we don't have substantive innate concepts. There's an epistemic motivation for this, which says, how is it that we would ever even know that these concepts apply to anything if they're not causally related to the world? How is it that we would acquire them? There's all sorts of concerns. But again, we're not focused on concept empiricism, just like we're not focused on concept rationalism, so I'm not going to say more about this. Okay, so if you think of empiricism and rationalism and contrast them, you can find a variety of different camps. That shouldn't be there, but whatever. Justification rationalism is one of these camps, and it holds that we have a priori knowledge of substantive forums truths. Moderate justification empiricism says we have a priori knowledge of trivial forums truths, but not substantive forums truths. And radical justification empiricism says we have no knowledge of forums truths, either because we can't access them or because there aren't any. Okay. Again, this kind of dispute between rationalism and empiricism isn't the subject matter of this course directly, but themes that we've discussed in this sort of historical background will run throughout our discussion, including throughout the discussion of why, basically throughout the entire course. Okay, we'll stop there.